Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom, take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the t:slim X2 insulin pump. And by Real Good Foods, real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, our monthly Dear D-Mom segment is back. Moira and I take on travel, talking about cure research with very young children and using words like sneaky and compliance.
Let go of that compliance thing. Leave it to the FDA when they check the food that they check off the boxes. But our kids are more rounded than that. And sometimes things are going to change in their lives, and sometimes they're going to do things different way. And it doesn't make them non-compliant. They're just people trying to figure out who they are and what they want to do in life.
Lots of questions and topics to get through this week. In our Community Connection, an update on Lilly's announcement about a generic lower-cost insulin. And tell me something good. A baritone gets a big honor. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. If you're new around here, glad you found us. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection. We talk to the movers and shakers in our community, as well as the healthcare providers and the tech folks and everyday people, quote unquote, just living with type 1 diabetes. My son was diagnosed with type 1 just before he turned 2. That was 12 years ago. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes. I have a background in broadcasting, local radio and television news, and that is how you get the podcast. And speaking of my husband, on a personal note, this week marks 21 years of wedded bliss. Yeah, it's our 21st anniversary. We got married not far from New York City. And, the weather can be pretty iffy this time of year, of course. So when we were being married, it wasn't snowing. But by the time we got up the next morning to try to go on our honeymoon, everything was canceled. So a little bit of a spring snowstorm that year, way back in 1998. Very memorable beginning to our marriage. Hoping the weather is a little bit this better. Certainly here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we live now. And if you are following me on social media, speaking of weather, you know that I was recently in Syracuse, New York, where it just, it's always snowing. It snows till May. And you think I'm exaggerating, but it happens. I was there for a reunion of my college radio station. I went to Syracuse University. WJPZ is the student-owned and operated radio station there with an amazing alumni group. It was really interesting because I won't take too much time here, but it struck me, this is a group that gets together once a year. People have helped with careers. We've kept in touch. I graduated 25 years ago. People are coming back for years and years for this. Many people who graduated a long time ago, certainly longer than 25 years. And a few people were saying things like, they don't have anything else like this in their lives. Like, isn't this remarkable? And look at this community. I couldn't help but think, we have the diabetes community. It's a club nobody wants to join. Much more fun to join a radio station community. But we do have each other. We do have a language all our own. We have experiences all our own. Certainly as parents of children of type 1, we have our own experiences. And our kids and adults with type 1 have a different one, which I think is important to acknowledge. But I didn't talk about it much. I'm not sure anybody else really gets it outside our community. But I did smile to think about really how lucky we are. Don't get me wrong, by community, I don't mean that you have to meet everybody in person and go to conferences and go to meetups and things, although those are wonderful. Your community could be a Facebook group. It could be this podcast, right? We have our own community now around this show. So I hope you find it. I hope you get as much out of it as I have. Now, coming up a little bit later after Moira and I hash things out and give advice, we are going to be talking about insulin and pricing and the issues there. I do want to mention that just last week, our newsletter that went out included type 1 international information. And I bring that up because not everyone knows we do a newsletter. I send this out every week along with the show. It goes out Tuesdays, pretty much right after the show is published. And it's an easy way to get that week's show in your email, which you can then send to anybody you want. But it also includes a bit of information, the link of the week, I call it. And this is something that I don't talk about on the show. It's generally something that is better read. Maybe you have to sign up or you want to read more, the old clip and save from the newspaper, if you remember those days. So I give you something a little bit extra there in the newsletter. To sign up, very simple. I'll put a link in the Facebook group, which is Diabetes Connections of the group. But if you just go to the website, diabetes-connections.com, it should pop up. If you're not sure, you can always email me or get in touch with me otherwise. Okay, DMOM advice coming up in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneTouch, and handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The OneTouch Vario Flex Meter seamlessly syncs with the free OneTouch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the OneTouch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, OneTouch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch Vario Flex Meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. My guest this week is really no longer a guest. I'm going to start calling her my monthly co-host. Moira McCarthy is an incredible author, advocate, an educator, and a speaker. Her daughter was diagnosed with type 1 when she was 6 years old, and Lauren is now in her late 20s. Moira is the author of Raising Teens with Diabetes, a survival guide for parents, and she is also a highly acclaimed and award-winning travel writer. We talk about our reporting backgrounds a little bit this week, but I want to remind you that we have a question about travel, and Moira has spent much of her career writing about amazing and exotic places, sometimes taking her kids, one child with, one child without type 1, so she knows her stuff. Apologies. When we started this segment in January, I said we were going to give away a book, and I did not ever announce the winner. So in fact, we have given away 2 books. We have selected from the first batch of questions. Random number generator is how I do that. And so congratulations to Morna Steiger and Rose Santos. You will be receiving your Raising Teens with Diabetes books in the mail. Thank you everyone for asking questions, and we do need more. You can email me or jump into the Facebook group and leave yours. We had plenty of questions this week, so let's get started. Here is my conversation. Dear DMOM with Moira. Hey, Moira. Always great to talk to you. How are you?
I am great. Here we are again, hanging out.
I love it. Okay, wait, but before we talk diabetes, let's talk about babies. How are your babies?
Oh, we have Molly for a year and a half, and she now has a sister named Lucy Louise, and it is just the best thing that ever happened in our lives. We can't even believe it. We feel like our riches were doubled in an instant. So all is well in grandparenthood. I am not old enough to be a grandparent, but I am, and it's all good.
Oh, well, I'm so glad to hear. I know that, the pictures are just beautiful. So thanks for sharing that a little bit with us. So let's just jump in and start. We have a bunch of questions to get through this week, and they're all really different, which I think is nice. But Jessica wants to know about flying with type 1. Any tips or tricks to make it easier? Do you carry medicines in a carry-on? And Maura, this is right up your alley. You travel so much for work. And when Lauren was diagnosed, she was 6. Were you already traveling a lot?
I had just taken a really big position with the New York Times Company doing adventure travel all over the world. And one of the things that I loved to do and my family loved to do was to have the kids come with me and kind of go off to the kids programs and review them and talk about them. So it was really important for us to jump right back on a plane again and get to it. So we had to figure it all out pretty early. And you're the same way. Yes. You weren't writing adventure travel for New York Times, but you were certainly going all over the place, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have no family here. So anytime we wanted to see anybody, we pretty much had to jump on a plane. And so Benny flew, first time he flew was when I was pregnant with him, and he was diagnosed at 23 months, and we were on a plane, I want to say 2 to 3 weeks later.
Wow.
Yeah. He was diagnosed at the beginning of December, the first weekend of December. And for the winter break at school, we went to my parents down in Florida. And so we definitely, we have some advice and funny stories over the years. But yeah, kids with type 1, I'm laughing and I'm hesitating because the truth is flying with a toddler is a nightmare for everyone anyway.
Including the other people on the plane.
Even more so for the other people on the plane. I once had to sing Elmo's World to my daughter, da 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 da. I think I sang it 50 times over and over again because it was the only thing that would calm her down. So diabetes makes it harder, but it already stunk. But do you remember what you did or things that you changed when you traveled?
So basically, I think that the more you travel, the more relaxed you get about it.
Yeah.
But over preparing is never a bad idea. But reasonable over preparing. For instance, everybody gets that letter from their endocrinologist saying that they need the medications that they're carrying. I've never had anyone ask us for that. And Lauren's an adult who travels now. I'm quite sure she doesn't have a letter that says that. But, I got it then just so I could have it in my pocket because heaven forbid. And then my biggest tips would be, and you can agree with me or butt in, first of all, carry on all your diabetes supplies. Do not check any of them for a million reasons, because you don't know what the temperature is going to be down there in the cargo area, because planes sit on tarmacs for hours and you don't know if that's going to happen, because you could get stuck somewhere in a city when your second flight is postponed or delayed, even overnight, and because you just want to keep everything with you. So that's my biggest thing, is carried on. And then the other thing I'll say is I see a lot of people stressing about TSA. There is a program called TSA Cares. People can Google it. Maybe you could include a link to it on the page, that you can talk to them ahead of time, and they actually know you're coming and they kind of grease the skids for you. We've never used it because we found overall that it's not that big of a deal. I'm sure there are people every once in a great while who bump into someone who's a pain in the butt, but that happens without diabetes too. And so we never really stressed a lot about going through security. But I don't understand the people who want to carry juice and liquids to treat their lows. I know that it costs more to buy a juice on the other side of security, but that's what we always did. And that just made it that much easier. It was one less thing to worry about and think about or explain. So we carried all our diabetes supplies, but as far as treating lows, we carried glucose tabs, and then I bought juices before we got on the plane. What did you do?
Yeah, I'll start backwards from there. We never, I think I had juice by accident, in the bag once or twice. And it depends on the person. They're supposed to let you through with it. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. So I stopped carrying it when I remembered to unpack the bag from last time. And we always threw in glucose tabs or truly like gummy snacks. Being on an airplane, if you are traveling with a child, I do think it's different for adults with type 1 or anybody who's taking care of themselves. But if you're traveling with a child, being on an airplane is the easiest place in the world to get drinks and load treatment, because you have people that are helping, you have flight attendants, and they have drinks. They have everything you could possibly want. So to me, it never occurred to me to even buy something on the way through in the airport, because I knew if we needed orange juice or Coke, we could get it for free on the plane.
Well, I'm going to just point out that, of course, I take 8 million flights a year. I love hyperbole. I've been on flights before when something has gone wrong and they have not had anything.
Oh, that's a good point.
So I'm just going to say, just for the sake of overreacting, have something with you on the plane to treat lows. It doesn't have to be juice either. I mean, I know some kids prefer it, but you can chew a glucose tab or you can eat some Skittles,
Well, yeah.
Whatever. Just make sure you have something on the plane.
No, I always, like I said, I always have gummies or glucose tabs or whatever. But you're right. And I should know better, because we were once stuck on the tarmac. This was before Benny was diagnosed. He was an infant. We sat on the tarmac for almost 7 hours. And that was not fun. And they ran out of everything. I mean, I couldn't, they barely had water. I mean, it was tough. That was fun. That's a long story. But anyway, but to go back to the TSA as well, we did not ever do TSA Cares either, although I will link that up. A lot of people I know love that. We did get TSA Pre, which if you travel even more than once a year is well worth the cost. It's good for 5 years. It doesn't really get you necessarily special treatment, but it's generally a shorter line. You don't have to take your shoes off, that sort of thing. But my family, we're like a circus going through security anyway, because my husband has a prosthetic knee. So the kids since day one were always used to, all right, dad gets flagged. He's going to go over there. We have to wait for him. Here's the system. So when Benny had to get checked, it wasn't such a crazy big deal because he was just like his dad. And I always tell people with small children, to kind of almost role play what might happen at TSA, even if you don't know for sure, if you've never done it. Just say, hey, when you go to the airport, they check and make sure everyone is safe. And why they do that is to make sure nobody brings, weird stuff that they don't know what it is on the plane. And so we pretended like you pat him down, or there might be a little wand or and you might say, like Benny thought it was a magic wand, so I probably should rethink that. If you're going to use it, it's like a stick, and go through. And my advice is always, look, if you have a problem with TSA, write your congressman, because at the airport, nothing is going to change. If you start yelling and screaming and carrying on, you're only going to delay your flight. You're not going to win.
Yeah.
Bad idea. It's terrible.
Bad
it's hard.
idea.
And I know it's so upsetting for some people if their child is taken aside. Now, listen, don't let them take your child somewhere private. If your 5-year-old is, they're not going to do that. And if they do, you have my permission to scream and yell. But as I always say, Congress is the way to make the change. It's not in the airport. The other thing is, if you pump, please, and you use a CGM, check with your company about what can go through the scanners and what can't. But this is completely off the record. I don't even know if I should keep this in, Moira.
Oh, I'm probably going to say the same thing.
Right back to Moira and me in just a moment. But first, do you know about Dexcom Clarity? It's their diabetes management software. And for a long time, I really thought it was just something our endo used. You can use it on both the desktop or as an app on your phone. The user can actually get there from the G6 app now. It's a really easy way to keep track of the big picture. I check it about once a week, and it really helps Benny and me dial back and see longer-term trends. Helps us not to overreact to what happened for just one day or even just 1 hour. The overlay reports help put context to glucose levels and patterns, and you can share the reports with your care team. It makes our appointments a lot more productive. Look, managing diabetes is not easy, but I feel like we have one of the very best CGM systems working for us. Find out more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to me and Moira and some travel advice. Yeah, but I didn't realize for a long time, like I said, it's a circus when we go through the airport. When Benny was old enough, he just took his pump off and threw it in the x-ray machine.
That's what Lauren does.
He was tired of getting stopped.
Yeah.
So he just threw it in. And when I found out, I was, what are you doing? You can't. He's like, Mom, I've been doing this for a long time. It's fine. They don't test the materials. So it's not FDA approved to do so. I don't recommend it, but it's not the end of the world if it happens. That's funny that Lauren does that too.
Oh, yeah. And she's like, it's just the easier thing to do. And Mom, I've been doing it forever and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. And I think the biggest part is for parents, you try not to stress too much about it. Don't read crazy stories on the internet and assume that's what's happening all the time, which we say about everything. Prepare yourself. And I love your idea, Stacey, of just walking it through with your kids, all your kids, because, lotion on your hand can be like a bomb detection and they have to. So it could happen to any of your kids. So just kind of, showing them what might happen and then just chill. It might take some time to get through. You might have to do an extra thing, but you're going to get on your plane and go to whatever wonderful place you're going and have a great time. And for the sake of the safety in the air, that's what we all have to go through. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And you started talking about carry-ons, and to answer Jessica's question, I 100% agree. Put everything in carry-ons. We often will divvy things up so that Benny's not carrying everything. If we're going away for a week, all the diabetes stuff gets moved around in our carry-ons. But what I also started doing a couple of years back was packing things in Ziploc bags so that it's clear, it's very easy to see. Once you get to your destination, it's really easy to use. And I also make one quart size or gallon size bag that is for the plane. So if everything you can need for the plane, a sight change, a sensor, ketone sticks, which he probably would never use in a 2-hour flight, but you know what I mean? Everything you need, a meter, I put it in one place so that if he has to get it out, he's not digging through all the supplies. I do not sort sights, then sensors, then test strips. That's how I used to pack it. I used to pack it by category. Now I pack it by how we're going to use it. Or we went to Israel over winter break. We were gone for 14 days. I used packing cubes for the first time for diabetes stuff, and that was fantastic. That worked out really, really well. And you can get packing cubes for a variety of different costs off Amazon. The only other thing, and I've never done this, is that many people say that you can designate an extra bag. If you're allowed one carry-on, you can designate a second carry-on as a medical bag. I've never done that. I would check with your airline, because the last thing you want to do is get to the airport and find out that that's a no-go.
Yeah. We never had the need to. I must be an expert packer. I love all your ideas, though, especially the Ziploc bags. And something that just popped into my head that has nothing to do with the actual flying, but on the other side, is do not trust hotel refrigerators with your insulin. They freeze them all the time. And if you want to take an extra vial, which you should, because you never know when a vial is going to break or blah, 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 or your Lantus that you might need because your pump breaks or whatever, just let it get warm. And if you have to throw it away, talk to your doctor about it, if it's warm for too long and you feel it's expired, and they will help you replace it. You're much better off doing that than putting it into a refrigerator. And when I chaired Children's Congress, all the parents wanted to have refrigerators in their room in the hotel, and we're like, no. That's not what you want to do. So just a little travel tip.
Yeah.
I always like to share.
We may have to do a whole show on travel because you're the person to talk to.
It's a good idea.
And the other tip I got, this is not mine, but this I love, what about forgetting your insulin or forgetting your supplies once you leave the hotel? I have a friend who, I swear, she says she puts her shoe in the refrigerator. Oh my God. Or she puts it in the drawer so that with her supplies so she doesn't forget. I would recommend perhaps your car keys. I think is a simple way.
That's actually a really good idea. Yeah. Except I'd probably just leave the car keys too.
Right,
I don't know.
Your shoe.
All right. And my shoe. Why are you wearing one shoe? Oh, insulin.
My
shoe.
Insulin. All right. So more to come on travel, but I think that's a good start because there's all sorts of other issues that people have in questions, especially for air travel. And I'll link up some columns too as you're listening that have been written about wearing a pump on an airplane and other really good pieces of advice, as well as the TSA Cares at diabetes-connections.com. Dorothy wrote in and wants to know, this is such a good question. Dorothy says, how do you deal with sneaky eaters? Her child is 17, type 1 since 14, on a roller coaster, she says, last 2 years particularly hard with compliance. There's a lot to unpack in the question alone. Maura, do you want to start?
There is. First, I'm going to say, Dorothy, I feel you. I've been there. I understand. I want to first talk about something that Dorothy probably isn't even thinking about. And Stacey, you and I have conversed about this before, but it's about language. And I know the word compliance seems to make sense, but I think parents of children with diabetes need to think about what extra baggage is loaded in the words that we use. And when I think of the word compliance, I think of George Costanza in that episode when he tries to be the bad boy. Our kids are good kids, and compliance puts such a label on them, or non-compliant. It's just, it has so much negative around it. So the first thing I want to say is let go of that compliance thing. Leave it to the FDA when they check the food that they check off the boxes. But our kids are more rounded than that. And sometimes things are going to change in their lives, and sometimes they're going to do things different way. And it doesn't make them non-compliant. They're just people trying to figure out who they are and what they want to do in life. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Stacey?
I hate that word compliant because it's also such a medical term, right? It's not a real word that anybody uses.
Yeah, I don't even think our medical people should use it with
diabetes.
I agree. I say don't use that word anymore. So Dorothy, I probably used it in my past and then understood as time went on. I'm not judging you by that. I just say, let go of that word. Now, the rest of the question, what I would say is the sneaking food. How did you expect your child to eat at that age without diabetes? In other words, if what they're eating is something that you don't allow your 17-year-old to eat no matter what, then maybe you could say they were sneaking it like in the same way a kid would sneak a beer, right? Because you don't want your 17-year-old to have a beer. So what I would say is think of it differently. And what's happening is they're getting busy with their life and just not always on top of all the details they need, i.e. checking the carbs and giving themselves insulin. And instead of figuring out how to get them to stop sneaking, see if you can figure out how to get them to, even a few times a day, kind of stop and think, okay, did I eat anything the past couple hours that I didn't bolus for? And can I do something about it now? That might be a nice baby step toward it. I try to think about how much people with diabetes have to think about in a day, and I can't imagine how anyone can not forget something on almost a daily basis, right? Don't you think so? And
absolutely.
And I would imagine that Benny, is walking with a friend in the hall and the friend says, "Hey, want a Twizzler?" and just eats it and forgets that he should really look at the label and figure out what it is and see what his blood sugar is and give himself insulin and then eat the Twizzler because he's busy living the life that he should live, right?
Oh, well, I'll do you one better. So last week, as longtime listeners know, right now our routine is that I text him half an hour, 20 minutes before lunch and say, don't forget to bolus for lunch. Sometimes I'll tell him what I think lunch is if we've packed it, or if he's buying lunch, he'll figure it out himself, but he likes that reminder. And then we have an agreement that if he hits 300 while he's at school, I will text him and say, "Hey, what's up? Bolus," whatever. He does not have to text me back, but it helps him kind of key in that something's going on. So last week, I texted him for lunch. He texted back and said, "Got it." And then about 2 hours later, he was 350. And I texted him and said, "What happened? Are you okay? Do you need a new site? Is everything all right?" And he texted back, "Oh, I ate pizza and a cupcake in class after lunch. I got it. I bolused late." And I cracked up because I was really happy that he actually had bolused for it. He knew why he was high because he bolused late for it. But he had lunch. And then he had pizza and a cupcake.
I know, but it's pizza and a cupcake. It would be rude not to eat them.
So
Come on.
But here's the question. Is that a sneaky eater? Right?
Yeah, in my opinion, no. And even if it's not uncommon for a 17-year-old to not want to be paying attention to their diabetes all the time. Yeah. And it's not uncommon to have to kind of have a few bumps along the way at that time in your life so that you can figure out what to do later. My daughter's almost 28, and I'm quite sure she grabs a bag of chips in a meeting at work and forgets to bolus and looks at her later and goes, "Oh, Jiminy Crickets." But like you said, as long as she might not say Jiminy Crickets, but
I'm sure she does.
As long as you get in the habit of realizing later and making a correction in a decent amount of time, kind of like you have the time span with Benny, I think that's a good thing for Dorothy to try to help her 17-year-old to learn. And so instead of how do I correct a sneaky eater, I would say go at it in a, hey, how about if, what are times in the day that you can take a moment and look? Is it right before your sports practice when you should be looking at what's going on anyway? Is it right after lunch or right before lunch? And just get your 17-year-old to learn to check in with themselves and think, oh, yeah, that's why I'm high. I had, a Snickers bar. And that also takes away the judgment from it, right? Because people with diabetes judge themselves all the time and feel judged by everyone by what they eat, by what they forget to do or what they do. So if you can help them kind of not feel guilty about it and just be more chill, I had pizza and a cupcake and I forgot to bolus and now I'm 500, but I know why, so I can fix it. That would be my advice. And
I get really frustrated. I mean, sure, I wanted to reach through the phone and say, "What are you thinking eating again?" But, the diabetes mom in me backs off and says, "Hey, he told me what he was doing, right? He didn't hide it. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to say, good job. But God, please don't eat too much." But that's less about diabetes than it is just about nutrition. And I think that's my answer to this question too is, we don't know anything about this family. And again, we're not judging, but right. If your family eats a certain way and the whole family eats a certain way and you don't want your kids, going down to the 7-Eleven to get a Slurpee, which is, I know once they're older and start driving, this is difficult. My daughter drives now and she will go to Harris Teeter, our local grocery store, and get a loaf of bread. This is exciting to her. Like, that's what she wants to eat. She wants to come home and toast the bread. So they all have these weird little things that they'll do and they'll eat. But if your family's eating a certain way, then I think you can say, look, we don't do that. Please try to eat this way. I'd really appreciate it. But if just your kid with diabetes is supposed to eat a certain way, you are setting yourself up for the sneak. And
eventually as they grow, they will choose to, my daughter now as an adult chooses most of the time to kind of be careful about what she eats and look at the carb counts and stuff. Something around that popped in my head. That's an example, I think, is in my house, we've always had the rule, don't eat up in your bedroom. Drives me crazy. It's nothing about diabetes. It's about ants and things you leave behind and icky. And so when I think about, like, if my kid was sneaking food up in their room, that wouldn't be a blood sugar or diabetes issue. That would be you are not supposed to eat in your room in this house. That's all there is to it. So when you find the candy wrappers in the room, that's what the issue was for me, because I just didn't like it.
I want to end this conversation about food and move on to the next question. But before we do, I'm going to link up a blog post it's called Food and Nothing But Food. And this is Renza, who writes for Diabetogenic.
My favorite person in the world, pretty much.
Oh, we're going to go to Australia and track her down, me and you. She's based there. She's been on the show. And she has a great column. And it's all about, she got to hear Nigella Lawson, I hope I'm saying that right, the famous chef, talking about food and cooking and how much she loves the kitchen. And somebody asked Nigella about what's her guilty pleasure. And she apparently did a whole speech leading from that about how food should not make us feel guilty. I don't sneak anything, she said. Oh, the question was, what do you like to sneak as a midnight snack? And she said, I don't sneak anything because food shouldn't make you feel guilty. And I'll link up more about that because that was not about diabetes. But I think we all have food issues that we bring to the table to begin with, and diabetes highlights them. So if we can get the guilt away, that's half the battle.
Absolutely.
All right, I'll link that one up as well. All right, so this question, I'm going to read this whole email because this is a family that found me late last year. They actually live near New York City, where I grew up, right outside of New York City in one of the suburbs that I'm very familiar with. And this one just melted my heart. So Andy writes, Hi, Stacey. I love the new segment with Moira. Yay. I have a topic suggestion. My son, Dean, who just turned 4 and is approaching 3 months into his diagnosis, asked me, when will I not have diabetes? And will I have diabetes when I'm an adult? It's hard not to get emotional even just writing this email. I've explained to him that he probably will have diabetes when he's an adult, but I reminded him of the adult diabuddies that we've met. He accepted these answers, but I'm worried that there is some underlying emotional turmoil building. I'd be interested to hear how you and Moira navigated this terrain. Whew. So
yeah, that makes me a little teary.
Yeah, when I read it, I mean, it just took me back to when Benny was little. And it's hard. It's really hard to explain these things. But I do think that, and kudos, Andy, you did it really well. You have to do it in an age appropriate way.
Yeah.
Right. And it changes, and it's okay to change, because I'm sure what I said to Benny at 2 is different from what you said to Lauren at 6.
Yeah. I have a friend whose son, they did their first walk to cure diabetes, and he was like 4 or 5. So they walked the 3 miles. And when they got to the end, he looked at her and said, so I'm cured now, right?
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, come on. So yeah, the answer definitely changed. Lauren was diagnosed at 6, so you would have more experience at 4 than me. But sure. 4 to 6, only a little bit of difference. And I think that I never made a promise that she would be cured.
Right.
I promised her that I would work hard all the time as long as she had diabetes to work toward a cure and work toward better treatments, which I continue to do 22 years later. But what I did promise her is that we would see progress and we would see ways to make her life easier. And when I said that to her in 1997 and 1998, we almost couldn't even imagine what the tools are that Dean, as a 4-year-old, is probably using now. And so there has been that much progress. And so what I would probably say, my advice is to say, I'm right here with you. You're going to be strong and you're going to get through this. And it's going to get less difficult as years go by. That would be I think that is a promise that absolutely can be kept. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think we were given a gift at diagnosis, and that gift was that no one I came in contact with told me that we were close to a cure.
Yeah, me too. No one ever said that to me.
Goodness. And I was, people say, 5 years away, 10 years away. We were never told that. I also had the gift, as you did as well in a way, of being a reporter. So you're kind of skeptical of things to begin with. And I had covered medical topics. I had my beat since day one It was assigned to me in television. I didn't really get to choose, but when I got a morning show job in Syracuse, New York, it came with being the health reporter. That was just a job. So I immediately became a health reporter. And I had seen and covered diabetes enough that I knew that the cure was not 2 weeks away or, 5 years away. So I very deliberately, it's so funny, it's sad to hear that story about the cure, Walk for the Cure, because I remember deliberately not calling it that when I talked to Benny about it, because what are we raising money for? How do you explain that you're not raising money for the cure tomorrow for your kid? So we talked about better research. I think at 2, I talked about making the doctors smarter. This will give them better tools or things like that. And at 2, we talked about just feeling good. He did not ask me, will I have diabetes as an adult, because no 2-year-old is that articulate. But as he got older and did talk about it, we would do very much like you'd say to Lauren, we're working towards getting better tools. Wouldn't it be cool if this would happen or that would happen? And as Benny got older, it seemed like every year or two something was changing, even if it was simple. So, he got an insulin pump after 6 months. And we were able to say, oh, look, now you can use this. And then about 2 years later, the insulin pump had a remote. This was the Animas Ping, which heartbroken. They don't make anymore. Love that pump. But then we were able to say, wow, look, we've got this. Then we were able to say, oh, look, you've got a CGM, or oh, look, you've got faster insulin, or, things were changing. So we were always able to talk about it. The problem is, as an adult, it's difficult to not get emotional and not want to put your thinking onto your little kid.
Exactly.
And over-explain, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to keep it age-appropriate. So I tell people, think about it like you're giving them the birds and the bees talk. How much do they really need to know? At what age, right?
That's a perfect analogy.
So
perfect.
Right. Thank you. So preschool, and this is my parenting, feel free to judge. Preschool, they need to know all the right body part names. They need to know what stuff does, but they don't need to know everything. No. And then as they get older, you can talk more about, well, it's interesting that we don't have a cure, but no autoimmune disease has been cured yet. So we need to make it, or whatever you want to say, but you need to make it age appropriate and not put because Andy, I know just from talking to you via email and Facebook messages, you know a ton. And you obviously don't want to overburden Dean, but you want to tell him something. I think you've handled it beautifully. I mean, talking about the adult diabuddies that you've met, that is fantastic. Yeah. We use that all the time with Benny still.
I think, too, the more that you can show your child that they can do anything they want to do, the better off you are, and that they can do it and feel safe doing it, which I think is going to segue into our next question, if we have time, about helping them do everything they want to do without fear and without worry and without angst as much as possible. Helps a child. There isn't a person with diabetes that doesn't want to be cured that I know of. But at the same time, living well is the best way to kind of shove it back in diabetes' face, right?
Absolutely. And that's a great segue. Let's talk about that, because this is also about what the parent doesn't want to put on the child. So Margaret, and she was not alone here, but Margaret wrote in and asked, how can I help my teen feel safe? Mine seems to avoid any activities that will be trickier because of type 1. And I worry that fear is keeping him from really enjoying this phase of his life. What do you tell a parent about that?
Well, so there's a couple things I would say. The first is, I know I raised my kids before the internet was quite as robust as it is now with Instagram and all those kind of things. But it's really important that you stay on top of what your children may be watching and reading on internet sites, because they could very well read something or see a video that is exaggerated or is a very rare situation that gets into their head and puts seeds of fear in them. Wow. The other thing is, I really worry about the kind of new expectation that parents feel their children are not completely safe unless they are watching over them or someone else is watching over them. Because the reality is, with just diabetes, not that diabetes is ever a just, but without other things complicating it, a teenager should be able to do all the things that a teenager wants to do, a healthy teenager wants to do, without fear, because there's really no terrible danger lurking right around the corner. I want to clarify, Stacey, that doesn't mean that there aren't things about diabetes that you have to pay attention to and are important. You have to know what your blood sugar is. You have to make sure you take your insulin. You got to have some carbs along in case you're low, but they're not lingering on the edge of disaster. And I think that watching the numbers as closely as we can watch the numbers now has led all of us to this unfair, heightened sense of fear and worry. You can tell me what you think about this, Stacey, honestly. There was a meme published recently that had like a day on a CGM and the kid had like spiked like 8 times that day. Those days that look like a roller coaster. Yep. And someone wrote under it like, this is how many times a day I have to save my child's life.
I did see that.
So, they mean well, and that the parent feels that way. To them, it feels that way. And my heart goes out to them. But I would suggest that it's the same as if we feed our kids breakfast and lunch and dinner every day, we're saving them from dying of starvation. In other words, we as parents have to figure out if our level of fear is appropriate. And if it isn't, we need to adjust it for the sake of our children. Now, I don't know anything about this family who wrote the question, so I'm not saying they did any of that. I'm just speaking in generalization.
Of course.
So my advice to that family would be to ask their teenager to write down exactly what they're afraid of and different things that they should be doing, and then have them sit down with their CDE or their endo and show them that list and have their endo talk through how they can approach it and why maybe they don't need to be afraid. Does that sound like a reasonable idea?
I think that's fantastic. The meme, as you mentioned, saving the life every 5 minutes. I have a feeling, again, I don't know that family either, and I know you don't either. I have a feeling that some of that was almost in humor. But you have to understand that whether it was a little bit of a joke or not, or this person really feels that way, whatever their meaning is, all their child is hearing, even if they don't say it to them, is, I save your life. Your life is in danger and I must save it. So exactly. When we joke around about that, they pick up on it. It's amazing.
Well, and the fear comes from love. It comes from love. I get it. But every time you say something, even if you think your child is listening, every time you say something like, I go in every morning and I thank God they're still alive. That's like going out into the air and marinating your child in it somewhere. And so if you really feel that level of fear as a parent, I would suggest you do the same thing that I suggest this teen do. Figure out what your greatest fears are. And when people tell me they're afraid, I always say, tell me exactly what you're afraid of so that I can kind of break it down for them. Do that with your medical team. Go in and say, I want to conquer my fear. We'll start with the 3 things I'm most afraid of. Here's what I'm afraid of. Help me understand if I should be afraid, if my fear is reasonable, or educate me so that I can try to work away from that fear. And then if you have a child who maybe has absorbed some of it, take the opportunity once you feel comfortable that you're moving past your fear to say to your child, listen, I got to tell you, I was afraid of things that aren't real. You know how you're afraid of the boogeyman under your bed that isn't there? I was afraid of this, and I want to tell you why I shouldn't have been afraid of it. Because we want to raise, you can hear it in the note from this mom who cares so much about her teen. We want to raise our kids to go out in the world and conquer everything. And other than other reasons impacting it past diabetes, there's really no reason why they shouldn't. So I'm really hoping, I hope this mom tries this with their child, with writing down what they're afraid of and talking to their medical team, and lets us know how it goes. Because I would like to hear that
get
that
back
works.
to us. And anybody who does this, because Moira, I'm so selfish. I have you on the show so I can learn from you too. I think that's brilliant advice. I do want to say, I know we're getting a little long here, but as we're talking about fears, some of them are a little smaller. And I wanted to bring up 2 that Benny shared with me. I had forgotten about them. It's funny. It's 12 years. You forget. But there was one time when he was, I want to say 5 or 6, and we had a low that we could not get up. We couldn't, it was an overnight low. Yeah, you know, I went in to check him and he was like 50 and we were giving him juice. And I think I gave him Oreos and he was not coming up. And he got that gross, you can't eat or drink anything else. He just felt terrible. And he said to me, what happens if my blood sugar doesn't come up? And thank goodness because in my head, I'm like, I don't know. You know, I have the glucagon, but I don't. And I said to him, we'll call Dr. V and he'll tell us what to do and you're going to be fine. And he was like, okay. And then he promptly threw up and that was, everything came up. And then he said, okay, now I can drink more juice. He drank a juice, his blood sugar came up and he went back to bed. So I don't know the medical explanation of that, but that's what happened. But it kind of calmed him down. And then years later, he had a high. He was probably high for a day. And he was sick. You know, he had a virus. He had a regular virus and he was 300 for probably 12 hours, no ketones. And he said, what happens if we can't get my blood sugar to come down? This is crazy. Like, what are we going to do? And I said, we'll call Dr. V and he'll tell us what to do and we'll do it. And as the years go on, you're able as a parent to say and pass along the secure feelings that you have now. Hey, we've handled this in the past. We know what we're doing. And if we don't know what we're doing, we have awesome people to tell us what to do. So that's kind of my parenting philosophy. And it was so reassuring to be able to pass that along to him.
For me, and maybe I can dig out this old blog and you can share it with this episode because I wrote a blog about it. For me, when Lauren was first diagnosed, for whatever crazy reason, I was terrified of ketones. And I really thought that I was internalizing it and that my 6-year-old wouldn't know. And I realized, I don't remember the story. I'd have to go back and read the blog. But something happened that made me realize that I had made my child horribly afraid of ketones and I had to take action to turn it around. And the first thing I had to do was educate myself more and then help my daughter. So I actually did this the wrong way, which is usually how I have advice to give because then I had to figure out the right way.
Yeah, if you find that, definitely let me know and we'll link that up. That sounds great. Wow. All right. So we got through a lot and you are still, just to check in on you. You sound terrific. You're feeling good, doing better.
I am coming along. I am probably not going to be speaking anywhere or getting on a plane until hopefully June. That's probably my best case scenario. So, but I'm here on your podcast and I'm on social media. So for the time being, as I heal, that's going to be it. How about you? Where are you going? What are you doing?
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad you're doing better. I've got some cool stuff. This month I'm going to, I don't know if I'm saying it right, Xeris, which is this company that is making a new shelf-stable glucagon. So I got invited to go to a quick conference with them and learn all about their stuff. So we'll be bringing you more information about that. And I'm also recently back from speaking at Syracuse University, where I went up and I just talked about podcasting. It wasn't even diabetes. So that's always fun because that's my alma mater and, of course, a great broadcasting school. And everybody's so interested in podcasting now. And then at the end of the month, I will be at Friends for Life way out in Seattle. We're going to hit that conference for the first time. So I'm really excited about going out there and learning about what's happening in Seattle.
Okay, so you have to go get donuts. Is it Top Shelf Donuts?
I don't know.
And awesome. You have to have breakfast at this really weird place where you stand in line and they just hand you your breakfast that I will send you the name of. It's right across from the Thompson Hotel, right by the Fish Pier. And the name is Biscuit, BITCH. I didn't know if you wanted that said on your podcast, but oh my goodness, there are so many carbs in it. If anyone has diabetes, bring all the insulin you've ever had in your life.
I love it. We'll definitely search it out and I'll report back. That is fantastic. Yeah, Benny's coming with me. The whole family's coming with me. We're taking the kids' spring break and we're going to do a road trip and then end up in Seattle. I mean, we're flying out to California and then we're going to make our way up the coast. It's only
I'm so happy that there's going to be a Friends for Life there. I have spoken at the Seattle chapter of JDRF a few times and the community up there is amazing. Amazing groups of people, and the diabetes research that goes on in Seattle is quite impressive too. So it's a perfect spot, and it's also a super cool city. You will have so much fun. If anyone is thinking about going still, you should just sign up and go. Just do it.
Fantastic. All right, good. All right, so send us your questions. Easiest thing to do is to join the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. I will post there. We're doing this segment every month. We'd love to get your questions, and hopefully we can help out. Let us know what you think. You can drop me a line, Stacey@diabetes-connections.com, or just ping us on social media. Moira, thanks again for talking to me. I love it.
It's always so good to talk to you, Stacey, and to share our little fun with everyone else. I hope people are enjoying this as we go along.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Always so great to talk to her. Glad she's doing much better. All right, time for our community connection, brought to you by Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the t:slim X2 insulin pump. And we are talking about the price of insulin. I'm going to say up front that I am taping this show, of course, as I usually do, a few days before you are hearing it. So I would urge you to check out the show notes for links and information, because stories like this can change. If you are a new listener, you can always find the show notes at diabetes-connections.com. I do a quick write-up for every show with a summary and time cues if you want to jump around and listen to different parts of the episode. And I also try to provide as many links as I can to give you more information. And this is one of those times that I think it's really important. The show notes are also in any podcasting app. It can be a little tricky to find in some of the apps. They're not generally that easy to find the details or more, but you can always go to the website. All right. So you would likely have heard by now that Eli Lilly is going to be selling basically a half-priced version of Humalog in an effort to try to get ahead of criticism about the rising costs of insulin. So this is an authorized generic of Humalog 100, which is the most common, popular insulin that Lilly sells. If you're using Humalog, this is your Humalog. And they're going to be selling it for $137.35 per vial, which is a 50% discount off of the list price. And I'm going to read from an article here that was in the New York Times. An authorized generic means that, except for the label, it is identical to the brand name drug and manufactured in the same facilities. The new product, which the company said would be made available as quickly as possible, will be called Insulin Lispro and will be sold through a Lilly subsidiary, Imclone Systems. If you have health insurance with pharmacy coverage, this is probably not going to affect you at all. You might see a slight decrease in cost. They're not really sure how this is all going to shake out. But if you do not have health insurance, this actually could help you. A generic is always welcome. Now, the reaction, as you can imagine, was mixed. There were a lot of people who said, this is ridiculous. This is a slap in the face. This is nothing. There were many who said, this is a terrific first step. This is something. This is progress. Let's take what we can get. My quick take on this is that I do think it is a step in the right direction. I think progress has been made. I think our voices are being heard. I think the pressure is on. I think Lilly, and stay with me here, is in a tough spot. Now, I've talked to them, and you've heard me. If you go back, if you search Lilly on the website, you'll see that I had a whole conversation with them about the price of insulin, and I'll actually link that up. I still think that an insulin company could do something heroic here, right? I mean, there really is room for a big hero move. But at the same time, with our current healthcare system, they are very limited in what they can do, because if they make too many changes, they get bounced off people's insurance. We've all heard of the crazy pharmaceutical cases where a drug is put out at a reasonable price. Nobody covers it. Nobody buys it. They jack up the price. Then the insurance companies can find ways to make money on it. Suddenly, that drug is everywhere and it's profitable. So it's a crazy system that we're living under right now. I think this is a great move, though, as I said, because of the pressure it shows. Lilly did not make this change just because. We have the Senate Finance Committee now looking at things. And as I've been saying for a while now, we have a lot of state legislators making moves. We have a lot of individuals throughout this country that are taking up the cause. A few got elected specifically to do this, to take on pharmaceutical costs. And we're seeing progress state by state. And I do think that's how it's going to come. I'm not sure it's going to happen nationally. Certainly the next couple of years are going to be very interesting. But I do think we are seeing progress. So what's going to happen even between the time I'm taping this and the few days later when you're hearing it? Again, I'll link it up. If anything incredibly dramatic happens, I'll try to pop back on. But I do think we're going to have to wait and see the reaction of the other insulin companies. And I don't think this is the end of the story, certainly far from it. I mentioned at the beginning of the show that we had sent out some information about Type 1 International. If you're interested in advocating, I think they're a wonderful organization, so I will link them up as well. I will say this, and, feel free to roast me if you want. There is no room for nastiness within the community. If I'm on Twitter and I say, hey, interesting move, Lilly, I appreciate this, but I'd like to see more, and you tweet back, you are out of your mind, what an idiot you are, that's a horrible thing to say, Lilly is evil and you're a moron. Is that helpful? I think not. I would urge you, as you listen, I don't think too many of my listeners are doing this, let's save our energy for researching, talking, educating, advocating, and let's keep the vitriol out of this. I know that people are angry. I know that people want to say things, and I know that there's a lot that you have on your mind. But let's try to do this in a constructive way. And I think that movement like this shows pressure is on and things are moving forward. So let's keep going. Time for Tell Me Something Good. This is the story of an opera singer in our community who has received a big honor. Tell Me Something Good is brought to you by Real Good Foods. And, I love the story about how Real Good Foods got involved with the diabetes community. The CEO got a letter a while back from a 9-year-old with type 1. And it was all about how happy he was to have a yummy pizza that his parents felt good about. Low carb, high in protein, only 8 carbs. This is like a personal size pizza. Real Good Foods isn't a diabetes company, but that letter made them realize they wanted to do more. I'm so excited to have them on board with the podcast now. We're talking about their pizza, their poppers, their enchiladas. Benny loves their food. And, we do eat regular pizza. I know a lot of parents with kiddos with type 1 don't, but he chooses the Real Good Foods items. It's awesome. Find out more about diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. So usually Tell Me Something Good is just that. But this week, I'm not going to tell you something good. I'm going to let you listen to something good. Check this out. That is Thomas Glass. He's performing an aria from Faust there in an audition. Wow. He was diagnosed with type 1 at age 5. So he has been performing this entire time with pockets sewn in to his costumes to fit his insulin pump. Now, just a quick aside, I know that because Moira McCarthy wrote about him about a year ago. Great article, and I'll link that up as well. And of course, I didn't realize until I looked at it that it was Moira, but I should have known because she knows everybody. And like I tell you, every time we talk to her, she's written so many great articles. And of course, she knows Thomas Glass. But Thomas announced on Facebook at the end of February that he won first place at the Rocky Mountain region of the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions. He will be singing in the semifinals on the stage at the Met. He wrote that this has been a goal of mine for as long as I knew what the Met competition was. I am humbled and honored to have been selected amongst what was an extremely talented group of singers. Now it's time to keep polishing those arias, he writes. Well, Thomas, we are rooting for you. I am in awe of your amazing voice. And I'll tell you one more thing. In the article that Moira wrote, I was struck by his last quote. He says, "Diabetes, it shouldn't inhibit me. I've never met a person out there who wasn't willing to help me figure this out." Talk about tell me something good. That's just fantastic. If you have a great story, you don't have to win an audition and go to the Met. Let me know. We're looking for all sorts of things, diversaries, skills, milestones, anything that's good in our community. This has become my favorite segment of the show, and I'd love to hear from you. You can email me, or I will post in the group. You can't miss it, and I'd love to hear from you. Please follow along on social media because things are getting a little busy here in March, and I'm looking ahead. I may have to take 1 week off, which I normally do not do except for Christmas week. I do think there's going to be a bit of a traffic jam of scheduling, maybe a perfect storm. I don't know the right analogy. I'll keep you posted. It'll either be the last week of March or the first week in April. And we won't skip a show. We'll put 2 out the following week or do something like that, but we may skip a week. But I will give you fair warning. And I know you understand because, we've got to do what we got to do around here. I did post in the podcast group that Benny, the other day, he went to change his Dexcom and he was just distracted. I think he was watching TV on his phone or something. And he actually just changed his inset before he needed to. So it was, oh my God, what did I do? So he actually pulled the other one out He thinks it was a little bit bent, but he was getting okay numbers, so who really knows? And then, of course, he had to go ahead and do the Dexcom too, but it wasn't that big a deal. I guess he was in a good enough mood. He just moved along with it. But he told me, he goes, tell that to your podcast people. So podcast people, you have been informed that distractions happen. You've probably done something similar. And I know I have, not diabetes-wise, but we have all been there. Oh, all right. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you as you listen to this podcast. It is such an honor and a privilege to provide what I consider a service to our community. Thanks for letting me do that week in and week out. I'm Stacey Sims, and I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.